My son placed the silver lid in front of me like it was something special. Everyone leaned in, smiling, watching, waiting. I remember thinking maybe he's finally proud of me again. But when I lifted the lid, my hands froze. It wasn't food. It was dog food, carefully plated, dressed up like something expensive. A joke about me, in my own son's home, on my birthday. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just looked at him, and then I stood up and walked out. Because in that moment, I realized something this wasn't the night I was humiliated. It was the night everything changed. If that moment hit you in the heart, take a second to like this video and subscribe. And tell me, what would you have done in my place? I'd really want to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. My name is Ariana Bennett. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if you gave enough love, it would come back to you one day. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the same form, but eventually. That belief carried me through things most people never saw. I wasn't always the quiet woman who sat politely at the edge of someone else's table. There was a time when I had a full house, a loud kitchen, and a husband who used to dance with me barefoot in the living room after long days. His name was Thomas Bennett, and he was the kind of man who fixed everything with his hands. Broken pipes, squeaky doors, even my bad moods. But life has a way of testing the strongest bonds. Thomas died when our son Michael was just 8 years old. One day we were arguing about something small, probably bills or groceries, and the next I was standing in a hospital hallway being told that a heart attack had taken him before I even had a chance to say goodbye. I remember gripping the edge of a plastic chair thinking I don't even know how to breathe without him, but I didn't have time to fall apart because Michael needed me. From that moment on, my life became very simple. Everything I did, every decision I made, every sacrifice, I made it for my son. I worked as a bookkeeper during the day and cleaned offices at night. Sometimes I took on weekend shifts, organizing records for small businesses that couldn't afford full-time staff. There were nights I came home so tired I couldn't feel my feet, but I still stood in the kitchen and made sure Michael had a warm meal before bed. There were months I skipped buying new clothes so he could have school supplies that didn't make him feel different from the other kids. I learned how to stretch every dollar until it almost broke. And Michael, he noticed. That's the part that makes everything harder to understand now. He wasn't always the man you saw at that table. As a child, he was gentle, thoughtful, the kind of boy who would leave little notes in my purse that said, "I love you," Mom, written in crooked handwriting. On Sundays, he would sit beside me in church and hold my hand just a little tighter when the pastor talked about loss. When he got older, he worked part-time jobs without me even asking, stocking shelves, mowing lawns, because he said he wanted to help. I remember once catching him counting his tips at the kitchen table, and he pushed half of them toward me, saying, "We're a team, right? We were a team." Or at least I thought we were. Michael was smart, determined. He had this quiet drive in him that reminded me so much of his father. When he said he wanted to start his own construction business after college, I didn't hesitate. I believed in him more than I believed in anything else, so I helped. Not in ways that anyone would notice from the outside. I didn't have the kind of money that turns heads, but I had savings carefully built over years of discipline and sacrifice, and I used them to support him when things got difficult. And they did get difficult. There were early setbacks, contracts that fell through, clients who didn't pay on time, equipment that broke at the worst possible moments. I watched him come close to losing everything more than once. Each time I stepped in quietly. A check here, a loan there, a signature on a document that gave him just enough time to recover. I never made a big deal out of it. I didn't want gratitude. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted my son to succeed. And eventually he did. His business stabilized. He started making a name for himself locally. He bought a house in a nice suburban neighborhood, one of those places with wide driveways, trimmed lawns, and neighbors who waved politely but never really knew you. I remember the first time I walked into that house. It was beautiful. Open space, bright windows, modern kitchen. Everything looked like something out of a magazine. Michael stood there smiling, watching my reaction like it meant something to him. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Pure, overwhelming pride. I thought we made it. Not me, not him. we. But somewhere along the way, that word disappeared. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing people don't tell you about losing someone who's still alive. It's never one moment. It's a slow fading, a quiet shift you don't fully notice until you look around and realize everything feels different. I first met Chloe around that time. She was polished, confident, beautiful in a way that seemed effortless but was probably anything but. She worked in real estate and carried herself like she belonged in every room she walked into. At first, she was charming. She called me Miss Bennett instead of Mom, but I told myself that was just respect. She complimented my cooking, asked about my life, and smiled in a way that made everything feel smooth. But over time, I started noticing small things. The way her smile tightened when I spoke too long, the way her eyes flicked over my clothes, never rude enough to comment, but never warm enough to ignore. The way she would gently correct me in conversations, as if I had said something slightly embarrassing without realizing it. "Actually, Ariana, it's a bit different now," she would say, laughing softly, like she was helping me keep up with a world that had moved on without me. I told myself I was imagining it, because loving your child means sometimes choosing not to see what hurts. After they got married, things changed more quickly. Invitations became less frequent. Phone calls became shorter. And when they did call, it was usually because they needed something. "Mom, could you watch Ethan this weekend? Mom, do you still have those old documents? Mom, we're a little tight this month, just until the next project closes." I always said yes, because Ethan, sweet, quiet Ethan, he was the one bright light that never dimmed. He reminded me of Michael when he was young, the same gentle eyes, the same way of noticing things other people missed. When he hugged me, he didn't rush it. And when he said, "I love you." Grandma, I believed him completely, so I kept showing up, even when I felt like I didn't belong, even when dinners at their house started to feel less like family gatherings and more like events. I had to carefully navigate choosing the right words, the right tone, the right moments to speak and stay silent. I adjusted myself in ways I never thought I would. I laughed when jokes brushed a little too close to discomfort. I nodded when conversations drifted into worlds I didn't fully recognize. I made myself smaller, thinking maybe that would make things easier, because the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I pushed back, if I questioned anything, if I demanded the respect I quietly longed for, I might lose what little connection I still had with my son. And for a long time, I told myself that was enough. But looking back now, I can see it clearly. The distance, the quiet disrespect, the subtle shift in power. It was all building towards something. I just didn't realize how far it would go. Until the night my son served me dog food and called it a joke. If you had asked me even a year before that night whether my son would ever intentionally humiliate me, I would have said no, without hesitation. Not because I didn't see the changes, but because I didn't want to believe where they might lead. The truth is, relationships don't break in loud, dramatic moments. They fracture quietly in small, almost forgettable ways. And if you love someone enough, you learn how to step over those cracks. Until one day, you realize you've been walking on a broken foundation the entire time. After Michael married Chloe, I told myself it was normal for things to shift. A man builds his own life. A new marriage needs space. A wife deserves to feel like the center of her home. I understood all of that. I respected it. But respect, I would learn, is not always returned just because you give it. At first, the changes were subtle. I stopped being invited over casually. Before Chloe, I could drop by with a pie or just to say hello. Michael would open the door with that same boyish smile and say, "Mom, you didn't have to bring anything, even though we both knew I always would." After Chloe, everything required planning. Let's check schedules. Maybe next week. We're just really busy right now. And when I did come over, it felt different. The house that once felt like an extension of my own life now felt like a place where I had to be careful. Not unwelcome, but not fully welcome either. Chloe had a way of controlling the environment without ever saying it directly. The music, the conversations, the pacing of the evening, it all seemed to orbit around her. And Michael, he adapted to that orbit faster than I expected. I remember one dinner in particular. I had made my chicken pot pie the same recipe Michael used to beg for when he was younger. I brought it over thinking it might remind him of home. Chloe smiled when she saw it, but it wasn't the kind of smile that warms you. "Oh, that's so thoughtful," she said, setting it aside on the counter. "We actually ordered from that new place downtown. It's more current. I stood there for a moment, not knowing where to put my hands, as if I'd brought something outdated into a world that had no place for it anymore. Michael didn't say anything, not a word. That silence stayed with me longer than I care to admit. Over time, moments like that began to stack up. Little comments, little dismissals, little shifts in tone. None of them big enough to confront on their own, but together they built something heavy, something undeniable. Phone calls changed too. Michael used to call just to talk, to tell me about his day, to ask how I was doing, to share small victories or frustrations. But gradually, those calls became shorter, more purposeful, and then they became requests. "Mom, could you watch Ethan this weekend? We have an event. Mom, do you still have those tax records from a few years ago? Mom, we're just in a tight spot. Can you help us out for a little while?" There was always a reason, always a sense of urgency, and always an unspoken expectation that I would say yes. And I did, every single time, because I told myself that's what mothers do. We fill in the gaps, we show up where we're needed, we give even when it's not convenient, even when it's not acknowledged, especially when it's not acknowledged. Ethan became my anchor through all of it. When I was with him, things felt real again. He didn't care about appearances or status or what was current. He cared about stories, about baking cookies, about sitting on the couch with his head resting against my shoulder while we watched old movies. He asked questions no one else asked. "Grandma, were you scared when Grandpa died? Grandma, how did you know what to do? Grandma, do you ever feel lonely?" Children have a way of seeing straight through everything adults try to hide. And I always answered him honestly, just enough truth to respect his curiosity, but not enough to burden his heart. Sometimes I was scared, I told him once. "But you kept going," he said. "Yes," I replied, smoothing his hair. I kept going, because that's what I had always done. What I didn't realize at the time was that while I was holding on to that role of the one who keeps going, who keeps giving something else, was quietly shifting beneath the surface. Power. Not in the obvious sense, not in the way people talk about control or authority, but in the subtle way people begin to see you differently. I started noticing how Chloe spoke about me when she thought I wasn't fully paying attention. "Oh, she's just old-fashioned. She doesn't really understand how things work now. She means well, but she gets confused sometimes." Confused, that word lingered longer than the others, because it wasn't just a description, it was positioning. It was the beginning of something. At first I brushed it off. I told myself it was generational differences, that younger people always think older people are out of touch. But then I started noticing how Michael would respond, not correcting her, not defending me, just letting it sit there, as if in some quiet way he agreed. That was the first time I felt something I didn't recognize. Not just hurt, not just disappointment, but distance. A kind of emotional distance that didn't come from physical space, but from a shift in how someone sees you. And once that shift happens, it's very hard to undo. The requests for help became more frequent. Sometimes it was money, always framed as temporary, always accompanied by promises that it would be paid back soon. Sometimes it was paperwork documents I had kept carefully organized over the years, things Michael suddenly needed access to. And sometimes it was simply my time. "Mom, we really need you this weekend. Mom, can you come over early and help set up Mom? Could you stay a little longer?" I rarely said no. Not because I didn't want to, but because every time I considered it, a small voice inside me whispered, what if this is the moment they stop asking altogether? What if saying no once meant losing everything? So I kept saying yes, even when I felt tired, even when I felt invisible, even when I began to realize that my presence was valued more for what I provided than for who I was. And yet, there were still moments, small, fragile moments, when I convinced myself things weren't as bad as they seemed. A quick hug from Michael, a shared laugh over something simple, a glance that reminded me of the boy he used to be. I held on to those moments like they were proof that the connection was still there, proof that I wasn't imagining things, but deep down, something in me already knew. The respect was fading, the balance was shifting, and I was slowly being moved from the center of my son's life to the edge. What I didn't know yet was just how far they were willing to push me once I got there, because the house they were so proud of, the life they were so eager to display, the image they worked so hard to protect, it wasn't built the way they let people believe, and I was the only one sitting at that table who knew the truth. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's this: when something feels too polished, too perfect, too carefully arranged, it usually is. The week leading up to my birthday felt like that, carefully arranged. It started with a phone call from Michael. That alone was unusual enough to catch my attention. He didn't text. He didn't send a quick message through Chloe. He called me directly. "Mom," he said, his voice warm in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. "We're putting together something special for your birthday this year." Something in my chest tightened, not in fear, but in something closer to hope. "Something special?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," he said, a soft chuckle following. "You've done a lot for us. It's time we do something for you." I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring out the window as he spoke, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the yard Thomas used to take care of. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things were shifting back, that maybe the distance I had been feeling wasn't permanent. Chloe got on the phone shortly after. "Ariana, we're so excited," she said, her tone bright, almost sugary. "We've invited a few close friends, some neighbors. It'll be intimate but elegant, intimate but elegant." That sounded like Chloe. "Just come ready to relax," she added. "No cooking, no bringing anything. This one's all about you. No bringing anything." I should have noticed how specific that was, because for years I had always brought something, dessert, a dish, something small that made me feel like I was contributing, like I belonged. This time I was being told not to. At the time, I interpreted it as kindness. Now, I understand it differently. The days that followed were filled with small details that didn't quite sit right. Ethan called me 2 days before the dinner. That too was unusual. He rarely called on his own, at least not without Chloe or Michael nearby. "Grandma," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, immediately softening. "Everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end. I just wanted to say, "Happy early birthday." I smiled even though he couldn't see me. "That's very sweet of you," I said. "Are you excited for the party?" Another pause. "This one longer," I guess he said. Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. "You guess," I repeated gently. He stopped himself. "Never mind, Ethan," I said softly. "You can tell me anything." I heard a faint sound in the background, like a door closing or footsteps shifting. "I have to go," he said quickly. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too," I replied. But the line had already gone quiet. I sat there for a long time after that call ended, holding the phone in my hand. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it. I didn't have anything concrete to point to, just a feeling, a quiet, persistent unease that settled in the pit of my stomach and refused to leave. But feelings are easy to dismiss when you want something to be true. And I wanted more than anything for that dinner to mean something good. The night of my birthday arrived colder than expected. Ohio winters have a way of creeping in early, wrapping everything in a chill that feels deeper than the temperature itself. I stood in front of my closet for longer than I should have, trying to decide what to wear. It's funny how something as simple as clothing can carry so much weight. I didn't want to look out of place. I didn't want Chloe's eyes to flick over me with that subtle, measuring expression I had come to recognize. In the end, I chose something simple but neat. A soft blue blouse, a dark skirt, a light coat that Thomas had bought me years ago. It wasn't modern, it wasn't flashy, but it was me. And for once, I didn't want to hide that. The drive to Michael's house felt longer than usual. Every red light seemed to last just a little too long. Every turn felt heavier than it should. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was already glowing. Lights filled the windows, warm and inviting from the outside. Cars lined the street more than I expected for something described as intimate. I took a breath before stepping out of the car. Just one deep breath, as if I could steady everything inside me with that single motion. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew. Not exactly what, but I knew. The energy in the room was off. People turned to look at me, not casually, not warmly, but all at once. Conversations paused just slightly too long before resuming. Smiles appeared, but they didn't quite reach the eyes. Chloe approached me first. "Ariana," she said brightly, her arms opening just enough to suggest a hug without fully committing to it. I stepped forward anyway. Her embrace was brief, controlled. "You look lovely," she added, stepping back and giving me a quick once-over. "Thank you," I said. Michael followed behind her. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. For just a second, it felt normal, familiar, but then he pulled away too quickly, and whatever warmth had been there disappeared. "Come in," Chloe said, gesturing toward the dining area. "Everyone's been waiting. Everyone's been waiting." That phrase echoed in my mind as I stepped further into the house. The table was set beautifully. Of course it was. Chloe never did anything halfway. Elegant plates, polished silverware, glasses that caught the light just right. Everything arranged with the kind of precision that looks effortless but takes hours to perfect. But it wasn't the table that caught my attention. It was the people. There were neighbors I had never met. A couple of Michael's business associates, 2 women Chloe often mentioned friends from her real estate office. And then, near the edge of the room, standing slightly apart from the others, Ethan. He saw me immediately, and unlike everyone else, his reaction wasn't rehearsed. "Grandma," he said, moving toward me quickly. He wrapped his arms around me in a way that felt real, tight, genuine. I held on to him a second longer than usual. "You okay?" I whispered. He pulled back just enough to look at me. For a moment, it seemed like he was about to say something important, something he had been holding in. But before he could speak, Michael's voice cut through the moment. "Ethan," he said, not loudly but firmly, "why don't you go help your mom in the kitchen?" Ethan hesitated, just for a second, then he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. As he walked away, he glanced back at me, and in that glance I saw something I couldn't ignore anymore. Not confusion, not nervousness, fear, a cold, steady fear that didn't belong on a child's face. I straightened slowly, my eyes moving across the room again, the smiles, the glances, the careful positioning of people. It all felt staged, like I had stepped into something that had already been decided before I arrived. And for the first time that night, the thought crossed my mind clearly. This isn't a celebration. This is something else. I just didn't know yet what role I was meant to play in it. I've replayed that night in my mind more times than I can count. Not because I want to remember it, but because part of me still tries to understand it. The way everything moved so smoothly, so deliberately, as if every second had been planned long before I walked through that door. We all took our seats at the table. Chloe moved with effortless control, guiding people into place like a hostess who had done this 100 times. Conversations picked up again, light and polished, as if nothing unusual had ever existed in that room. I was seated at the center. Of course I was. The guest of honor, at least that's what it looked like. Michael sat across from me, Chloe to his right. Ethan was placed further down the table than usual, far enough that he couldn't easily speak to me without raising his voice. That detail didn't escape me. Neither did the way Chloe kept glancing toward the kitchen as if waiting for something or someone. I folded my hands gently in my lap, keeping my posture calm, controlled. Years of practice had taught me how to sit still even when something inside me was unsettled. Dinner began like any other. Plates were brought out, conversations flowed, people laughed at things that weren't particularly funny, and through it all I felt it at that quiet tension humming beneath the surface, like a string pulled just tight enough that it might snap. Then Chloe stood. She didn't tap her glass. She didn't need to. The room shifted toward her automatically. "Before we eat," she said, her voice smooth and confident, "I just want to say a few words." Of course she did. She always did. I looked at her, meeting her eyes. Her smile was perfect. Too perfect. "Ariana," she continued, turning slightly toward me, "tonight is really about celebrating you." A few people nodded. Someone murmured agreement. "You've lived such a Long life, she added, pausing just enough for the words to settle. Long, not full, not meaningful, just long. And I think we can all agree, she went on, her tone light, almost playful, that caring for family, especially as they get older, comes with its own challenges. There it was, the first crack. A few soft laughs rippled through the table. Not loud, not cruel, just enough to test the boundary. I felt Michael's eyes flick toward me, then away again. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct her. He let it continue. "But we do it," Chloe said, lifting her glass slightly, "because that's what family is about, right? Supporting each other, even when things aren't always easy." More laughter, this time slightly more confident, because once someone sets the tone, others follow. I sat there, my hands still folded, my expression calm. If you had looked at me from the outside, you might have thought I was simply listening. But inside, something was shifting. Not breaking, shifting, because I was starting to see it clearly now. This wasn't casual. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional. Chloe sat back down, satisfied. Now she said lightly, "Let's eat." Dishes began to move around the table. Plates were passed. Conversations resumed. But there was a subtle difference now. An expectation, a quiet anticipation that hadn't been there before. Michael stood then, not fully, just enough to reach toward the sideboard behind him. "I've got something special for Mom," he said. My eyes lifted to him. Something in his voice. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even playful. It was controlled, measured. He walked back toward the table, holding a plate covered with a polished silver lid. It caught the light as he moved, reflecting small flashes across the room. For a brief moment, just a brief, fragile moment, I thought, maybe this is where things turn. Maybe everything leading up to this had just been awkward, poorly delivered attempts at humor. Maybe this was the real gesture, the one that mattered. Michael placed the plate in front of me carefully, deliberately. "Go ahead, Mom," he said. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. Enough that I could feel every pair of eyes settling on me, waiting, watching. I placed my fingers on the edge of the lid. They were steady. I remember noticing that, how steady they were, because inside, nothing felt steady at all. I lifted the lid, slowly, and for a second, my mind didn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like food, arranged carefully. Styled almost. But then the smell reached me, sharp, unmistakable, and everything clicked into place at once. Dog food, not by accident, not mistaken, deliberately placed, deliberately presented, as if it were something elegant, something worthy, a joke about me. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The room held itself in that moment, balanced on the edge of whatever would come next. Someone let out a small, uncertain laugh. Another followed, then a few more. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make it real. I lifted my eyes slowly, first to Michael. He was watching me, not with concern, not with hesitation, but with something else, expectation, as if he was waiting for a reaction, for me to play my part. Then I looked at Chloe. Her smile was there again, that same perfect, controlled smile, except now there was no softness in it at all, only satisfaction. Across the table, I saw Ethan. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide, fixed on me, not on the plate, on me. And in those eyes, I saw it again, fear. But this time, it wasn't just fear for himself, it was fear for me. That's when I understood something very clearly. They wanted a reaction. They wanted embarrassment. They wanted me to shrink, to protest, to give them something they could laugh at. Something they could dismiss, something that would confirm whatever story they had already decided to tell about me. And in that moment, I made a choice. I placed the lid back over the plate, gently. No sudden movements, no trembling hands, just calm. Then I looked at Michael, really looked at him, at the man sitting across from me who once held my hand in church and told me we were a team. And I spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. I hope I said that whatever this is, was worth it. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for people to realize this wasn't going where they expected. I stood, slowly, picked up my purse from beside my chair. No one stopped me. No one spoke. Even Chloe remained silent now, her smile faltering just slightly at the edges. As I turned, my eyes met Ethan's one last time, and I gave him a small nod, a reassurance, not for what had happened, but for what I was about to do. Then I walked, out of the dining room, through the living room, past the carefully arranged decorations, past the guests who suddenly didn't know where to look, and out the front door, into the cold night air. I didn't run, I didn't look back, because something inside me had already settled. They thought that moment was about humiliation, about making me small, about proving something. But what they didn't understand was that the moment I walked out that door, I stopped being the woman who would quietly accept whatever they gave me, and they had no idea what that was going to cost them. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp and immediate, like the world itself was trying to wake me up. For a second, I just stood there on the porch. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and suddenly everything inside that house, the laughter, the tension, the performance felt distant, muted, like it belonged to another life. My hands were still steady. That surprised me, because inside my chest, everything felt like it was breaking apart all at once. I walked to my car slowly, each step deliberate, as if moving too fast might cause something to collapse that I wasn't ready to face yet. When I got inside, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the windshield. For a long time, I had learned how to hold myself together, to stay composed, to absorb things quietly and deal with them later in private, where no one could see the cracks. But this wasn't something that could be tucked away. This wasn't a careless comment, not a misunderstanding, not even simple disrespect. This was intentional. And intention changes everything. My fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel. Still no tears. Not yet. I turned the key. The engine came to life, low and steady, and I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. The streets were quiet. Most of the houses were lit from within, warm golden light spilling through windows where families sat together eating dinner, talking, living their ordinary lives. I drove past them slowly, my mind moving faster than the car. Moments from the night replayed themselves in sharp fragments. Chloe's smile, Michael's voice, the sound of those soft, uncertain laughs, the smell, that smell. I inhaled sharply as if I could push it out of my memory. But it stayed. It would stay. I didn't realize how far I had driven until I saw the church, a small brick building on the corner of Maple and 3rd. The same church where Michael had held my hand as a child. The same place where I had sat alone after Thomas died, trying to understand how to move forward when everything I knew had disappeared. Without thinking, I turned into the parking lot. It was empty, of course it was. The lights were off, the doors closed, the world quiet in a way that felt both peaceful and unbearable. I parked under a street lamp and turned off the engine, and that's when it happened. The tears. They didn't come slowly. They didn't build. They broke. Suddenly, completely without warning, I folded forward, my forehead pressing against the steering wheel as the sobs came hard and deep, pulled from a place I hadn't let myself touch in years. It wasn't just about the plate. It wasn't even just about the humiliation. It was everything. Every moment I had ignored. Every comment I had excused. Every time I had chosen silence over confrontation. Every piece of myself I had made smaller so that my son could feel bigger. It all came rushing back at once. I did everything. I whispered, though there was no one there to hear it. My voice shook. I gave you everything. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had been done to me. Not as a mother, not as someone trying to understand, but as a person. A person who had been deliberately hurt, deliberately humiliated by someone she had loved without condition. The crying lasted longer than I expected, long enough for the cold to seep into the car, long enough for my breathing to slow, for the sharp edges of the pain to dull just slightly. When it finally subsided, I leaned back in my seat, wiping my face with trembling hands, and then something changed. Not all at once, but enough. Because beneath the pain, there was something else. Clarity, a quiet, steady clarity that hadn't been there before. For years, I had told myself that love meant endurance. That being a good mother meant forgiving things that didn't feel right, that keeping the peace was more important than demanding respect. But sitting there in that empty parking lot, I realized something I should have understood long ago. Endurance without boundaries isn't love, it's permission. And I had been giving that permission over and over again. My hands steadied, my breathing evened out. I reached for my phone. For a moment I stared at it, my thumb hovering over Michael's name. I could call him, I could demand an explanation, I could ask him why, but deep down I already knew. And more importantly, I knew that whatever answer he gave me wouldn't change what had happened. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't a mistake, this was a choice. So instead, I scrolled further down, to a name I hadn't called in a while. Linda Carter, my attorney. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before she picked up. Ariana, she said, her voice calm but alert. Is everything all right? For a moment I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized that this call meant something. It meant I was no longer handling this quietly. I need to see you, I said finally. There was a brief pause. Is it urgent, she asked. Yes. My voice didn't shake this time, not even a little. All right, she said, come by first thing in the morning. We'll go over everything. The words settled into me like something solid. Thank you, I replied. After I hung up, I sat there for another moment. Not crying, not shaking, just thinking. For years, I had kept certain parts of my life separate, not hidden, just private. After Thomas passed, I didn't just inherit his memories. I inherited something else, something Michael had never fully understood. Thomas had been more than a man who worked with his hands. Before the construction jobs, before the small repairs, before the long days that wore him down, he had been part of something bigger, a logistics company, regional, quiet, but growing. He had owned a stake in it, not large enough to draw attention, but significant enough to matter. When he died, that stake passed to me. Over time, the company grew, steadily, quietly, and so did the value of that stake. I never talked about it, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't see the need. My life didn't change dramatically. I still lived modestly, still worked, still saved, but what I had was security, real security, the kind that doesn't need to be displayed to exist. And over the years when Michael needed help, that security became his safety net, the down payment on his house, the quiet loan that kept his business from collapsing 2 years ago, the temporary help that always seemed to arrive at exactly the right moment. He thought it came from careful savings, from small sacrifices, from a mother doing her best. He didn't know the full picture. He never asked, and I never told him, because I believed it didn't matter. That love was enough. But sitting there in that parking lot, I understood something with absolute clarity. It mattered, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Trust, support, foundation. And tonight, they had taken that foundation and turned it into a stage for humiliation. I looked down at my hands. They were completely steady now. No trembling, no hesitation, just stillness. And in that stillness, a decision had already been made. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I wasn't going to explain why what they did was wrong, because people who need that explanation already know. Instead, I was going to do something they had never expected. I was going to stop giving. And they had no idea what that was about to take away from them. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, but my mind kept moving slow, deliberate, like it was sorting through years of memories and finally placing them where they belonged. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't exhausted. I was clear, and clarity, I've learned, can be more powerful than anger. I dressed carefully that morning, not out of habit, but intention. A structured navy jacket, simple blouse, low heels, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just composed, grounded, because I wasn't going to Linda Carter as a mother in pain. I was going as a woman making decisions. Her office sat on the second floor of a modest brick building downtown. Clean, professional, quiet, the kind of place where things were handled without unnecessary emotion. Linda greeted me at the door herself. Ariana, she said gently, her eyes scanning my face with concern she didn't voice out loud. Come in. I stepped inside, taking in the familiar space, the neat rows of files. The framed degrees, the polished desk that always seemed to reflect order and control. Coffee she offered. No, thank you, I replied. I'd rather get started. She nodded once, immediately shifting into her professional posture. All right, she said, gesturing for me to sit. Tell me what happened. And so I did. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just clearly. I told her about the dinner, about the plate, about the laughter, about the silence. I didn't rush through it. I didn't skip details. I laid it out the way you present facts because that's what it was. When I finished, Linda didn't speak right away. She leaned back slightly, her fingers steepled together, her expression thoughtful. That wasn't just disrespect, she said finally. That was deliberate. Yes, I replied. And you're sure this isn't an isolated incident? I held her gaze. No, I said, it isn't. She nodded slowly. Then we need to look at the bigger picture. She turned toward her computer, pulling up files I hadn't looked at in years. Let's start with what we already have in place, she said. Document by document, she walked me through it, the trust, the agreements, the protections I had signed without fully revisiting in a long time. And as she spoke, something became very clear. Michael's life wasn't as independent as he believed. The house, Linda said, clicking into a specific file. The down payment came from your transfer structured through the Bennett family trust. I nodded. I remember. What you may not remember, she continued, is that the trust includes restrictions. Restrictions, I asked. Yes, she said. They can live in the house. They can maintain it. But they cannot refinance, sell, or leverage it without your approval. I felt something settle in my chest, a quiet, steady weight. And if I withdraw that approval, I asked. They lose flexibility, Linda replied. Financially, it limits their options significantly. I let that sink in, not as revenge, as reality. What about Michael's business, I asked. Linda opened another file. 2 years ago, she said his company was on the verge of collapse. You co-signed a private recovery loan through one of your financial channels. Yes, I said quietly. He's still operating under that structure, she continued. Without it, he would have defaulted. And now Linda looked at me directly. If that support is withdrawn, he'll need to stand on his own. I exhaled slowly. For years, I had seen my role as support, stability, a safety net. But sitting there listening to Linda lay it out in clear legal terms, I saw something else. Leverage. Not something I had ever intended to use, but something that existed nonetheless. There's more, Linda said. She pulled up a recent document, one I didn't recognize immediately. This was an inquiry made about 3 months ago, she explained. An inquiry I repeated. Yes, she said. Your son and daughter-in-law consulted another legal office. A cold sensation moved through me, about what Linda turned the screen slightly so I could see. They were asking about processes related to financial guardianship. The words didn't register at first. Guardianship, I said slowly. Yes, Linda replied. Specifically, the steps required to determine whether an individual is still capable of managing their own financial affairs. I stared at the screen. The text blurred for a moment, not because I couldn't see it, but because I didn't want to understand it. They were asking if I stopped. If you're no longer competent, Linda finished gently. The room felt quieter, heavier, and suddenly things that hadn't made sense before began to align. Chloe's comments. She gets confused sometimes. She doesn't really understand things anymore. The subtle corrections, the careful positioning. It wasn't casual. It was groundwork. They were building a case. I said quietly. Linda didn't soften it. Yes, she said. That's exactly what they were doing. I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I closed my eyes, not to escape it, but to fully take it in. The dinner, the humiliation, the audience, the laughter. It wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. Break me down, make me appear unstable, create a narrative, so that when the time came, they could take control, and no one would question it. When I opened my eyes again, something inside me had shifted further. Deeper. Tell me what my options are, I said. Linda nodded. We can reinforce your current legal protections immediately, she said. Freeze any attempts to alter the trust. Restrict access. Require formal review for any financial requests. And beyond that, I asked. We prepare, she replied. Document everything. Strengthen your position. And if necessary, we confront. I sat there for a moment, letting the words settle. Confront. For years, I had avoided that. Chosen peace over conflict, silence over clarity, but now silence would only serve them. There's something else, Linda added. I looked at her. If they were willing to go this far, she said carefully, you need to consider that the dinner wasn't the end of it. I know, I said. It may have been the beginning, she continued. I nodded slowly. Because deep down, I already understood that. They think I don't see it, I said. Linda gave a small, knowing look. Then that's your advantage. A quiet stillness settled between us. Not empty, not uncertain, focused. Don't confront them yet, Linda said. Let them believe everything is still under their control. I thought about Michael, about the way he had looked at me across that table, waiting, expecting, certain. Yes, I said, I won't, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And what they didn't realize was that the moment they thought they had reduced me to something small, they had actually given me something else, clarity. And clarity doesn't make noise. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It waits. And when it moves, it changes everything. That afternoon, after I left Linda's office, I didn't go straight home. I drove for a while instead. Not aimlessly, but not toward any specific destination either. The city passed by in quiet fragments. Storefronts, traffic lights, people crossing streets with their own lives, their own worries, their own stories. It struck me in a strange way how ordinary everything looked, how the world could remain so steady while something inside your life shifted so completely. By the time I finally turned into my driveway, the sun had already begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the yard. The house felt different when I stepped inside. Not empty, not lonely, just quieter, as if something had been cleared out without making a sound. I set my purse down carefully on the table and took off my coat, hanging it in its usual place. The routine felt grounding, familiar, a small reminder that not everything had changed, but enough had. I moved into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there for a moment staring at nothing in particular. Then my phone rang. The sound cut through the silence so sharply that I flinched. I glanced at the screen. Ethan. My heart tightened immediately. I answered without hesitation. Ethan, Grandma. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm here, I said softly. Are you okay? There was a pause. I could hear his breathing, uneven, hesitant, like he was trying to decide how much he was allowed to say. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. The words came out fast, almost tripping over each other. I'm so sorry. Oh, sweetheart, I said, my voice instinctively gentle. You have nothing to apologize for. Yes, I do. He insisted, his voice cracking slightly. I knew something was going to happen. I went still. What do you mean? I asked carefully. Another pause. Longer this time. I heard them, he said finally. Heard who, Mom and Dad? The words settled heavily in the air. What did you hear, Ethan? I wasn't supposed to, he added quickly, as if that mattered. They were in the kitchen a few hours before you got there. They thought I was upstairs. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. And what did they say? I asked. There was a soft sound like fabric shifting, maybe him sitting down. They were laughing, he said. That word alone made something inside me tighten. About what I asked, about the dinner, he replied. My grip on the phone tightened just slightly. They said, he hesitated, his voice dropping even lower. They said it was going to be perfect. Perfect, the same word Chloe had used. They said you needed to be, he stopped, needed to be what I asked gently. Put in your place. The room seemed to tilt slightly, though I didn't move. I didn't understand. Ethan continued quickly. I thought maybe it was a joke or something. But then Mom said, he stopped again. It's okay, I said softly. You can tell me. She said, he whispered. If we don't do this now, she'll keep thinking she has a say in everything. My chest tightened, not sharply, not painfully, but deeply, like something sinking in layer by layer. And Dad? I asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he said, he didn't stop her. That answer didn't surprise me, but hearing it still mattered. He actually, Ethan swallowed. He said maybe it would loosen you up. I let out a slow breath. There it was. Not just participation, agreement. I didn't want them to do it, Ethan said quickly. I tried to say something, but Mom told me to stay out of it, and then Dad told me to go upstairs. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before you came. Oh, Ethan, I said, my voice soft but steady. You did nothing wrong. "Do you understand that I should have warned you?" he whispered. "You're a child," I said gently. "That wasn't your responsibility." There was a quiet pause on the line. Then he spoke again. They were talking about something else too. I stilled. What else, they said? Once you stopped interfering, things would be easier. Interfering. The word echoed in my mind. What did they mean by that, I asked. "I don't know," he said. "But Mom said something about paperwork, and Dad said you wouldn't fight it if you were embarrassed enough." My eyes opened slowly. The pieces aligned instantly. Not just humiliation, preparation, control. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to weaken me, emotionally, socially, maybe even legally. Grandma Ethan's voice pulled me back. "I'm here," I said. "Are you mad at me?" he asked quietly. The question hit me harder than anything else. "No," I said immediately. "No, sweetheart, I could never be mad at you." "Are you mad at them?" he asked. I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to give him something he could understand. "I'm disappointed," I said carefully. "That wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for him." "I don't like it when they talk about you like that," he said. "It doesn't feel right." "It isn't right," I replied gently. Another pause. Then in a smaller voice, he said, "I think they recorded it." My heart skipped. "Recorded what the dinner," he said. "Mom set up her phone earlier. She said it would be funny to watch later." I closed my eyes again, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from certainty. "Do you know where the phone is now?" I asked. "I think she still has it," he said. "She was showing it to someone after you left. Someone. That meant others had seen it. Or would." "Okay," I said calmly. "Thank you for telling me that. I didn't want them to hurt you," he whispered. "I know," I said softly. "And you didn't let them do it alone. You told me the truth. That matters more than you realize." There was a small silence. Then he said, "I wish you didn't leave." I felt that one. Deep. "I didn't leave you," I said gently. "I left something that wasn't right." "Will you come back?" he asked. The question lingered. Not simple, not easy. "I'll always be here for you," I said. "Always. I won't change." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the truth. "Okay," he said quietly. "I love you, Ethan. I love you too, Grandma." The line went silent. I lowered the phone slowly, placing it on the counter. For a moment I just stood there, still, listening to the quiet. But this time the quiet felt different. Not empty, not uncertain. Clear. Because now I didn't just have suspicions. I had confirmation. The dinner wasn't a cruel impulse. It was planned, discussed, agreed upon, and documented. They had crossed a line, not just as family, but as people. And more importantly, they had left evidence behind. I walked to the window, looking out at the fading light. For years I had protected them, excused them, given them the benefit of doubt they hadn't earned. But now there was no doubt left. Only choices. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't choosing what was easiest. I was choosing what was right, and what they didn't understand yet. Was that the truth once it's spoken out loud? Doesn't go back into silence. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Not because I had to, but because something inside me no longer allowed me to stay still. There was a time when mornings felt heavy, when getting out of bed required effort, when the quiet of the house pressed in on me, reminding me of everything I had lost or let slip away. But this morning was different. I wasn't waking up into uncertainty. I was waking up with purpose. I moved through my routine slowly, deliberately. Coffee brewed, curtains opened, the soft gray light of early morning filled the room, and for a moment I stood there holding my mug, watching the world come alive outside my window. Ordinary, peaceful, unaffected. It struck me again how life continues regardless of what breaks inside us, and maybe that's a kind of strength too. By the time I sat down at the dining table, I already knew what needed to be done. Not emotionally, not impulsively, carefully, strategically. I reached for my phone and opened my messages. There was nothing from Michael, nothing from Chloe, no apology, no explanation, not even an attempt. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't see what they had done as something that required repair. To them, it had been justified, acceptable, maybe even successful. I set the phone down. Then I picked it up again, but this time with intention. I dialed Linda. She answered on the second ring. Ariana, she said I was just about to call you. I've started preparing some preliminary documents. I have more information, I said. Her tone shifted immediately. Go ahead. I told her about Ethan's call, about what he overheard, about the planning, the intention, the recording. I didn't rush it, I didn't soften it. I laid it out clearly, just like I had the day before. When I finished, Linda was quiet for a moment. That changes things, she said finally. How, I asked. It strengthens your position, she replied, significantly. I leaned back in my chair. Because it shows intent. Yes, she said. This wasn't an isolated incident or poor judgment. This was coordinated behavior designed to undermine you. Undermine. The word fit. What about the video, I asked. If we can obtain it, it becomes powerful evidence, Linda said, especially if it shows not just the act itself, but the reactions, the context. I thought about Ethan's voice. They wanted to use it, I said quietly. Linda paused. What do you mean they were planning to show it, I explained. To others. Maybe even use it to shape how people see me. There was a sharp edge in Linda's voice now. That would align with a broader strategy. To question my competence, I finished. Yes, the confirmation didn't shock me. Not anymore. So what's the next step, I asked. We move forward on multiple fronts, she said. First, we secure everything, your accounts, your trust, your authority. No changes without direct legal oversight. Good, I said. Second, she continued, we begin documenting everything formally. Dates, conversations, incidents, especially anything that shows a pattern. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. And third. Linda hesitated slightly. We wait. I smiled faintly. I thought you might say that. Let them believe you're still in the same position, she said, that you're processing emotional uncertain. If they think they've succeeded in destabilizing you, they're more likely to make mistakes. Mistakes, opportunities. I understand, I said. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the plan settle into place. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was solid. Then, as if the universe had decided to test that calm. There was a knock at my door. 3 sharp, deliberate taps. I didn't move right away. I didn't rush. I simply stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Michael stood there, Chloe beside him. They looked composed, not ashamed, not nervous, composed. Ariana, Chloe said quickly, stepping forward with a bright expression that felt rehearsed. We were hoping to talk. Of course they were. Come in, I said calmly, stepping aside. They entered like they had done 100 times before, like nothing had changed, like last night hadn't happened. I closed the door behind them quietly. Michael walked into the living room, glancing around as if grounding himself in familiar surroundings. Chloe followed her posture, controlled her smile still in place. We wanted to clear the air, she said, sitting down without waiting to be invited. Clear the air. I remained standing for a moment, then took a seat across from them. I'm listening, I said. Michael leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. Last night he began things got out of hand. I didn't react. Chloe nodded quickly. It was meant to be light-hearted, she added. You know, just a joke that didn't land the way we expected. A joke. I folded my hands in my lap. Dog food, I asked calmly. Chloe's smile flickered just slightly. When you say it like that, that's what it was, I said. Michael shifted in his seat. Mom, he said, his tone tightening just a bit. You're focusing on the wrong part of this. The wrong part. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see the boy he used to be. I saw the man he had chosen to become. And what's the right part, I asked. He exhaled as if preparing himself. The right part is that we were trying to lighten things up, he said. Things have been tense lately. You've been difficult about certain decisions. Difficult. I let the words settle. Decisions about what I asked. Chloe leaned in slightly. About finances, she said smoothly. About involvement, about control. There it was. No longer hidden, no longer subtle. Just stated. You've been holding on to things, Michael added. Things that would be easier if we could manage them more directly. Manage them. I nodded slowly. I see. Chloe reached into her bag. I actually brought something, she said. Of course she did. She pulled out a set of documents and placed them neatly on the coffee table between us. We think this would simplify everything, she said. I didn't reach for them. What is it? I asked. Just some adjustments, Michael said. Authorization access, nothing major, nothing major. I looked at the papers, then back at them. You humiliate me in front of a room full of people, I said calmly, and the next morning you bring me paperwork to sign. Chloe's smile returned tighter this time. We didn't see it as humiliation, she said. We saw it as a moment, a moment. I let out a quiet breath. No, I said. You saw it as leverage. That was the first time their expressions shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to tell me I had said something true. Michael straightened slightly. Mom, he said, his tone sharpening, you're overthinking this. No, I replied. I'm understanding it. The room fell quiet, and in that silence, something changed. Not in me, in them, because for the first time, they realized I wasn't reacting. I was seeing, and that made me far more dangerous than they had expected. The silence that followed my last words didn't feel awkward. It felt precise, measured, like something had finally landed exactly where it was supposed to. Michael leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening in a way I recognized from years ago, only this time there was no hesitation in it, no softness behind it, just control trying to hold its place. Chloe, on the other hand, adjusted quickly. She always did. Her expression shifted from polite composure to something more focused, more direct. Ariana, she said, her tone smoothing out again. I think we might be misunderstanding each other. I didn't respond immediately. I simply watched her, because sometimes people reveal more when you don't interrupt them. This isn't about control, she continued. It's about practicality. Things are getting more complex, and we just want to make sure everything is handled efficiently for everyone. Efficiently. The word hung in the air like something rehearsed. For everyone, I repeated calmly. Yes, she said with a small nod, including you. Michael leaned forward again, picking up the thread. Mom, you've been doing things a certain way for a long time, he said. But things change. Systems change. And sometimes people need help keeping up. There it was again. That same subtle positioning. Not outright accusation, not direct insult, but something just close enough to it. Keeping up, I echoed. Chloe gave a soft, almost sympathetic smile. We're not saying you can't manage things, she said, just that it might be easier if you didn't have to do it alone. Easier. Help. Support. They wrapped their intentions in soft language, but the meaning underneath hadn't changed. They wanted access, authority, control. I glanced down at the documents on the table, still untouched, still waiting. Then I looked back at them. Why now, I asked. The question was simple, but it mattered. Michael hesitated, just for a second, and in that second I saw it. The flicker, the calculation. Because it's time, he said finally. Time. I tilted my head slightly. Time for what? For things to be more streamlined, he replied. Chloe nodded in agreement. It would just make everything smoother moving forward, she added. I held their gaze. And last night, I asked, was that part of making things smoother? Michael exhaled sharply. You're stuck on that, he said, frustration slipping into his tone now. Yes, I said, I am. Chloe's expression tightened. Ariana, it was a mistake, she said. We've already said that. No, I replied quietly. You explained it. That's not the same thing. The room shifted again. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for the surface they had been maintaining to begin cracking. Michael's voice hardened. What do you want, Mom? He asked. An apology. Fine, I'm sorry, it went too far. The words came out quickly, too quickly, like something offered to move past a problem, not to address it. I studied him. You don't sound sorry, I said. His jaw clenched. I said the words, he replied. That's not the same thing, I repeated. Chloe shifted in her seat, her patience thinning. This isn't productive, she said. We came here to fix things. No, I said, you came here to move past things. There's a difference. And they both knew it. Michael stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps before turning back toward me. Look, he said, running a hand through his hair. This doesn't have to be complicated. It already was. You're making it complicated, he added. I remained seated, calm, still. No, I said, I'm just not simplifying it for you anymore. That stopped him. Not completely, but enough. Chloe leaned forward again, her voice lowering slightly, shifting into something more direct. Ariana, she said, we're trying to help you. I met her eyes. No, I replied. You're trying to position yourselves. That was the moment everything shifted, truly shifted, because there was no more room for pretense after that. Michael's expression changed first. The restraint dropped. The softness, what little was left of it, disappeared. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was defensive. "You know exactly what it means," I said. Chloe sat back slowly, her gaze sharpening. "This is exactly what I was talking about," she said, turning slightly toward Michael. "She's becoming more resistant. Resistant, not thoughtful, not cautious. Resistant, like I was a problem to be managed." Michael nodded once, almost unconsciously. "I'm not resistant," I said calmly. "I'm aware." That word landed heavier than anything else I had said, because awareness changes the balance. Michael looked at me, really looked this time, and for a brief moment, I saw uncertainty. It passed quickly, but it was there. "You're overthinking this," he said again, though there was less confidence behind it now. "No," I replied. "I'm seeing it clearly." Chloe crossed her arms. "So what now?" she asked. There it was, the real question. Not about understanding, not about repair, about outcome. I looked at the documents again, then back at them. Now I said slowly, "Nothing changes." Michael frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not signing anything I said. Not today, not tomorrow, not under pressure." The words were calm but firm. Chloe's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not a good decision," she said, "for who?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't a version of that answer that didn't reveal too much. Michael stepped forward again. "Mom, you're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." His eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I said that I should have paid attention sooner." Silence again. But this time it wasn't controlled. It was uncertain. Chloe picked up the documents abruptly, her movements sharper now. "Fine," she said. "If you want to make this difficult, we can do that." There it was. No more softness. No more careful phrasing. Just the truth. Michael didn't stop her. He didn't correct her. He didn't even look surprised. Because this was the version of them that had been there all along, just hidden, until now. I stood up slowly, not in response, not in reaction, just because the conversation had reached its end. "You should go," I said. Michael stared at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he shook his head slightly. "This isn't over," he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. Chloe walked toward the door first. Michael followed. And as he reached the threshold, he paused. Just for a second, like he might say something else, something different. But he didn't. He just opened the door and left. I stood there for a moment after it closed, listening to the quiet settle back into place, but it didn't feel the same as before. It felt sharper, clearer, because now everything was out in the open. No more guessing, no more interpreting, just truth. And the truth was simple. They thought I was something to manage, something to control, something to outmaneuver. What they didn't understand was that I had already stopped playing the role they had written for me, and without that role, their entire plan had nowhere to stand. The house felt quieter after they left, not the kind of quiet that presses in on you, but the kind that settles. The kind that gives you space to think without interruption. I didn't move right away. I stood there in the living room looking at the door they had just walked through, letting the moment fully pass before I did anything else. For years, I had reacted quickly, filled silences, smoothed over tension, made things easier. But now, I allowed things to end exactly where they were, unresolved, clear, honest. I walked back to the table slowly, my eyes falling to the space where the documents had been. Gone. Of course they were. Chloe wouldn't leave anything behind that she might need later. I sat down, folded my hands, and for the first time since that night, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not grief, control, not over them, over myself. That's when I reached for my phone, not to call Michael, not to respond, but to move forward. I dialed Linda. She answered quickly. "Ariana, they came," I said. "I figured they might," she replied. What happened, I told her. Everything, their tone, their words, the documents, the shift. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The facts spoke clearly enough. When I finished, Linda let out a quiet breath. "They moved faster than I expected," she said. "They're nervous," I replied. "Yes," she agreed, "and that works in your favor." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "They're not going to stop," I said. "No," Linda replied. "They won't." There was no hesitation in her voice, no attempt to soften the reality. And neither am I said. Another brief pause. Then Linda spoke again. Good. That single word carried more weight than anything else. Then we moved to the next step, she continued. Which is, I asked. We bring everything into the open, she said. The words settled into the room. This isn't just about documents anymore, she explained. It's about establishing a clear record. Not just legally, but socially. I understood what she meant. Reputation, perception, narrative, the same things Michael and Chloe had been trying to shape. We don't confront them privately again, Linda added. We do it in a controlled environment with witnesses. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. Because I wasn't interested in arguments anymore. I was interested in truth. Can you arrange it? I asked. I can, she replied. Give me a couple of days. After we hung up, I sat there for a while. Not thinking about what might happen, not imagining outcomes, just sitting, letting the stillness settle deeper. Because once you decide to move forward, and the hardest part isn't the action, it's accepting that there's no going back. 2 days later, everything was in place. I sent the message myself. Simple, direct. Dinner at my house, Friday evening. We need to talk. Michael responded within minutes. We'll be there. No questions, no hesitation. That told me everything I needed to know. They thought this was another conversation they could manage, another situation they could control. Friday came quietly. The house was clean, not staged, not arranged for appearance, just prepared. I didn't cook anything elaborate. I didn't try to create comfort, because comfort wasn't the purpose of this evening. Clarity was. They arrived right on time. Of course they did. Chloe stepped in first, her posture composed, her expression carefully neutral. Michael followed. There was no warmth this time. No attempt at small talk. Just tension contained but present. Ariana Chloe said, her voice controlled. Chloe, I replied. Michael. He nodded once. Mom, I stepped aside. Come in. They moved into the living room. And that's when they saw. Linda was already seated. So was Pastor James. And one more person. A man they didn't recognize immediately but would soon. The guest who had been at the dinner. The one who had recorded everything. Chloe stopped walking. Just for a fraction of a second. Michael's expression shifted more noticeably. What is this? He asked. I closed the door behind them. It's a conversation, I said. Sit down. They hesitated, then slowly, they did. The air in the room changed instantly. No longer casual, no longer manageable. Structured, intentional. Linda spoke first. Thank you for coming, she said calmly. We won't take more time than necessary. Michael leaned back slightly, his eyes moving between us. This seems excessive, he said. No, I replied. It's appropriate. Chloe crossed her legs, her hands resting neatly in her lap. What exactly is this about? She asked. I met her gaze. It's about truth, I said. Linda opened a folder, neatly organized, precise. We'll begin with financial documentation, she said, and just like that, everything began. Piece by piece, detail by detail. She laid it out, the trust, the contributions, the loan, the restrictions, all of it. Not emotionally, factually, clearly. Michael's posture shifted slowly as she spoke, from relaxed to attentive to tense. Chloe remained still longer, but I could see it in her eyes. The calculation, the adjustment, the realization that this wasn't a conversation they controlled. And now Linda said, closing one folder and opening another, we moved to conduct. That word hung in the air. Conduct. The man beside her reached forward, placed his phone on the table, pressed play. The room filled with sound, laughter, voices, the clink of glasses, and then the moment. The plate, the lid, the silence. The smell, even through memory, seemed to return, and then the laughter, soft, uncertain, real. I didn't look at the screen, I looked at them. Chloe's face had gone still, completely still. Michael's eyes were fixed forward, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. They couldn't explain it away. They couldn't soften it. They couldn't control it. Because this time, they were the ones being watched. The video ended, silence filled the room again, heavy, unavoidable. Pastor James spoke next. I was approached recently, he said calmly, with concerns about Ariana's mental state. Michael's head snapped toward him. Chloe didn't move. And after seeing this, he continued gesturing slightly toward the phone. I felt it was necessary to be present. There it was. Everything. Laid out, connected, clear. For the first time, there was nowhere for them to go, no narrative to hide behind, no version of events they could reshape, just truth, raw, undeniable, and sitting there watching them face it. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something else, finality, because some things, once revealed, don't go back to what they were, and this was one of those things. For a moment after the video ended, no one moved. It wasn't the kind of silence you fill with words. It was the kind that demands truth. Michael was the first to react. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice tight, controlled, but just barely. No one answered. Linda didn't interrupt. Pastor James remained still. And I simply watched. Because I had learned something important. When people are cornered by truth, they reveal who they really are. This doesn't prove anything. Michael continued, his tone rising slightly. "It was a joke. It got out of hand, sure, but this..." He gestured vaguely at the room, the documents, the witnesses. "This is overkill. Overkill." Chloe still hadn't spoken, but I could see it in her posture now, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed together just a little too tightly. She was thinking, calculating, trying to find the angle. "It proves intent," Linda said calmly. Michael turned toward her. "It proves context," she continued. "It shows a deliberate act designed to humiliate. Combined with your previous legal inquiries, it establishes a pattern." Pattern. The word landed heavily. "That's not what this is," Michael snapped. "Then what is it?" Linda asked. He hesitated, just for a second, and that second was enough. Chloe spoke then, finally. "It was inappropriate," she said, her voice measured. "We've already acknowledged that. Acknowledged, such a careful word. But this narrative you're building," she continued, glancing briefly at me, "is exaggerated." Exaggerated. I almost smiled, because even now, she was trying to shape the story. "Is it?" I asked quietly. Her eyes met mine. "Yes," she said. I leaned forward slightly. "Then explain it," I said. She didn't respond immediately, because the explanation requires alignment, and for the first time, theirs was breaking. Michael stepped in again. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said, his voice sharper now. "We were trying to make a point." There it was. Not a joke, not a misunderstanding. A point. What point, I asked. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And something shifted, not outside, inside him, because whatever he had been holding back was no longer staying contained. "That you don't get to control everything anymore," he said. The room stilled. Completely. Even Chloe turned toward him slightly, because that wasn't part of the plan. I felt the words land, not like a blow, like a truth I had already known but was now hearing out loud. "Control," I repeated. "Yes," he said more forcefully now. "You've been holding on to things for years. Decisions, money, influence, everything runs through you." I sat back slowly. "And that's a problem?" I asked. "Yes," he said. No hesitation, no softening, just yes. Chloe shifted beside him. "Michael," she started, but he didn't stop. Ever since I was a kid, he continued, his voice rising slightly. "It's always been about what you think is best, what you decide, what you allow." The words came faster now, stronger, like something that had been building for years. "I built my own life," he said, "my own business, my own family, and yet, somehow it still feels like I'm asking permission. Permission." I let that sit. Then I asked the question that mattered. "Permission," I said slowly, "or support?" He didn't answer right away, because he knew the difference, and so did I. Chloe stepped in again, her voice more urgent now. "This isn't helping," she said. "We need to stay focused." But it was already too late, because once truth starts moving, it doesn't stop where you want it to. "It's not about the money," Michael said, almost as if he hadn't heard her. "It always is. It's about how it feels," he continued. "Always needing something from you, always knowing that if things go wrong, you're the one who fixes it." I tilted my head slightly. "And that's a burden?" I asked. "Yes," he said. Again, no hesitation, a burden. The words settled deeper than anything else. Because I had never given to control him. I had given to protect him, to support him, to help him stand. And now, he was telling me that very support had become something he resented. "I never asked you to fix everything," he added. "No," I said quietly. "You just accepted it." That stopped him. Not completely, but enough. Chloe leaned forward again, her voice sharper now. "This is exactly what I've been saying," she said, turning toward Michael. She doesn't see it. She doesn't understand how things work now. I looked at her. And how do things work now, I asked. She met my gaze directly. People don't build their lives around dependency, she said. They move forward. They take control of their own systems, not family, not relationships, systems. And how do you take control, I asked. She didn't hesitate, by restructuring them. There it was, clear, unfiltered, honest, restructuring, not improving, not supporting, taking. I nodded slowly. Through humiliation, I asked. Chloe's expression tightened. That wasn't the intention, she said. Yes, Ethan's voice echoed faintly in my memory. If we don't do this now? Yes, it was, I said. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was sharp, focused, because now everything was exposed, not just actions, motives. Let's be honest, Michael said suddenly, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. He looked at me, directly. For years, he said I hated it. The word hung there, unavoidable. Hated what I asked. He didn't look away. Hated how we lived after Dad died, he said. Hated being the kid who couldn't afford things. Hated watching you struggle. I felt something shift. Not outside, inside. I did what I had to do, I said. I know he replied quickly. That's not the point. Then what is, I asked. His voice dropped slightly. The point is, I never wanted to feel like that again. There it was. The core, not Chloe, not the business, not even the money, fear. And when things started going well, he continued, when I finally built something stable, it still felt like it wasn't fully mine. I looked at him. Because I helped you, I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Yes. The word landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't anger. It was truth, his truth. I didn't want to owe anyone, he said. You didn't, I replied. But I did, he said. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. This wasn't just about control, or money, or power. It was about identity, about how he saw himself, and how my presence, my support, had shaped that. But understanding doesn't erase harm. It doesn't undo choices. It doesn't justify cruelty. You could have told me that, I said. His jaw tightened. It wouldn't have changed anything, he replied. No, I said. It would have changed everything. Because we could have talked. We could have adjusted. We could have found a way forward that didn't involve tearing each other down. But they hadn't chosen that. They had chosen humiliation, strategy, control, and now they were facing the consequences of that choice. I looked at both of them, then at the people in the room, and for the first time since this began, I felt something settle completely. Not anger, not sadness, final understanding, because whatever came next, it wouldn't be built on illusion anymore. Only truth, and truth doesn't ask for permission to exist. The room stayed quiet after Michael's last words, not tense in the way it had been before, not fragile, just settled, because everything that had been hidden was no longer hidden, and once the truth is spoken out loud, there's a kind of stillness that follows, not confusion, not denial, just clarity. I looked at my son, really looked at him. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't seeing the boy I had raised, or the man I had hoped he would become. I was seeing him as he was, a man who had carried resentment longer than I realized, a man who had mistaken support for control, a man who had chosen humiliation over honesty. And I felt something inside me shift again, not break, not harden, settle. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. Michael blinked clearly, not expecting that response. What, he asked? For telling the truth, I said. He frowned slightly as if unsure whether I was agreeing with him or not. I don't know what you think that changes, he said. It changes everything, I replied. Chloe let out a small, impatient breath. This is going in circles, she said. We need to move forward. I turned my attention to her. Yes, I said, we do. Linda closed the folder in front of her, softly, deliberately. As Ariana's legal counsel, she said I'd like to outline the next steps. Michael shifted again, tension returning to his posture. What steps, he asked. Linda met his gaze evenly. The protection of her assets, her authority, and her legal autonomy, she said. Chloe's expression tightened. That seems unnecessary, she said. No, Linda replied calmly. It's necessary. There was no room for interpretation in her tone, no space for argument, just fact. I took a slow breath, and then I spoke. Effective immediately, I said, my voice steady. All financial access you've had through me is revoked. The words landed cleanly. No hesitation, no softness. Michael's eyes widened slightly. What does that mean? He asked. It means, I said, that the informal support you've relied on ends. Chloe leaned forward quickly. You can't just I can, I said. And for the first time, she stopped mid-sentence because she heard it. Not anger, not emotion, authority. Michael shook his head slightly. Mom, you're overreacting, he said. No, I replied. I'm responding. There's a difference. The trust remains in place, Linda added. But its protections will now be strictly enforced. Michael turned toward her. What protections, he asked. The ones that were always there, she said. The ones you chose not to understand. That hit. Because it was true. The property cannot be altered, sold, or leveraged without Ariana's explicit consent, she continued. And that consent is no longer implied. Chloe's posture stiffened. You're locking us out, she asked. I'm setting boundaries, I said. Michael stood up abruptly. This is insane, he said. After everything I've done, I raised my hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough. Stop, I said, and he did. Not because he wanted to, but because something in my voice made it clear. I wasn't going to be spoken over anymore. You don't get to rewrite this, I said calmly. The room went still again. You don't get to take what I gave, I continued, and turn it into something I owe you. His jaw tightened. I built my life, he said. Yes, I replied, and I supported it. Both things can be true, but only one of us chose to turn that into something bitter. Chloe stood now, too, her movements sharper. This is exactly why we needed control, she said. There it is, I replied. No more hiding, no more soft language, just truth. Michael ran a hand through his hair, again pacing slightly. So what now, he asked. You just cut us off. I looked at him. No, I said. I stepped back. There's a difference. You wanted independence, I continued. Now you have it. The words were simple, but their weight was not. Chloe let out a short, humorless laugh. You think this hurts us, she said. I didn't respond, because I didn't need to. Time would answer that. Michael stopped pacing, looked at me again, and for a moment, something flickered. Not anger, not defiance, something else, uncertainty, but it didn't stay. You're making a mistake, he said, maybe. But it was mine to make, possibly, I said. But it's mine. That mattered. Linda spoke again. There's one more thing, she said. We all turned toward her. Any further attempts to question Ariana's mental competence, she continued, will be formally challenged. Chloe's expression shifted immediately. That's not she started. It is, Linda said, documented, clear, final. The room felt different now, not tense, resolved, because everything had been said, everything had been placed where it belonged. I looked at Michael, then at Chloe. This isn't punishment, I said. It's consequence. That's something people often confuse. Punishment is about control. Consequence is about reality. Michael didn't respond. Chloe didn't argue, because there was nothing left to argue, only outcomes. I'm not taking anything from you, I continued. I'm just no longer giving what you've learned to expect. That's when it truly landed, not in words, in silence, because expectation is powerful, and losing it changes everything. I took a breath. There's one thing that hasn't changed, I said. Michael looked up. Ethan, I will always be there for him, I said, always. That was not negotiable. That was not conditional. That was not something they could restructure. Chloe's expression tightened again, but she didn't speak, because she understood. This part, she couldn't control. Michael nodded once, slowly, and for the first time since this began, he didn't argue, he didn't push, he didn't try to shift the conversation. He just accepted it. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough. We're done here, Linda said quietly, and we were. Michael turned toward the door. Chloe followed. This time there were no last words, no threats, no attempts to reclaim ground, just departure. The door closed behind them, and the house fell quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty, not heavy, complete, because something had ended, not just a conversation, a pattern, a dynamic, a version of myself that no longer existed, and in its place, there was something else, something steady, something clear, something that didn't need to be defended, because it was already whole. The first morning after everything changed felt unfamiliar. Not in a painful way, not in a hollow way, just different. For years, my days had been shaped by other people's needs, calls to return errands, to run problems, to solve that weren't entirely mine, but had somehow become my responsibility. Even when no one asked directly, I carried it. That quiet readiness, that constant awareness. But that morning, there was nothing waiting. No messages, no expectations, no unspoken obligations pulling at me the moment I opened my eyes. I lay there for a few extra seconds staring at the ceiling, letting that absence settle in. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. I got up slowly, moving through the house without rushing. The sunlight filtered in through the kitchen window, soft and steady, illuminating the same table where I had spent years organizing bills, reviewing documents, planning ways to make things work. Only now. There was nothing urgent on it. I made coffee, sat down, and just existed. It sounds simple, but when you've spent decades being needed, being responsible, being the one who holds everything together, sitting still without purpose can feel almost unfamiliar. And yet as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, I realized something. I wasn't empty. I was unburdened. That realization didn't come with excitement. It came with calm. Later that day, I took a walk. Not because I needed to clear my head, but because I wanted to move. The neighborhood looked the same houses, the same trimmed lawns, the same quiet rhythm of people going about their lives. But I noticed things differently. The way the wind moved through the trees, the sound of distant laughter, the feeling of my own steps steady, grounded mine. I wasn't walking away from something anymore. I was walking into something new. That afternoon, I stopped by the community center a few blocks away. It wasn't a place I'd spent much time in before, not because I didn't want to, but because I'd always been occupied, busy, needed elsewhere. But now I stepped inside. The space was simple, warm, welcoming in a way that didn't require anything from me. A woman at the front desk smiled. "Can I help you?" she asked. I hesitated for a moment. Then I said something I hadn't said in a long time. "I was wondering if you needed volunteers." The word felt strange, not because it was unfamiliar, but because for once, I was choosing where to give my time. Not responding, choosing. She brightened immediately. "We always do," she said. And just like that, something shifted again. Over the next few weeks, my life began to take on a different rhythm, not busy in the old way, not filled with obligation, but purposeful. I helped organize reading sessions for children, sorted donations, spent afternoons sitting with people who simply needed someone to listen. And in those quiet interactions, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing. Connection. Not built on expectation, not shaped by obligation, just genuine. Ethan remained part of my life. That had never been in question. We arranged visits carefully through proper channels, making sure everything was clear, structured, protected. It wasn't as spontaneous as before, but it was honest. And that mattered more. The first time he came over, after everything, he stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around like he was trying to understand what had changed. Then he ran to me. Not hesitantly, not cautiously, just ran. And when he hugged me, it felt the same. Solid. Real. "You're okay," he said into my shoulder. "I am," I replied softly. He pulled back, studying my face. "You look different," he added. I smiled slightly. "Do I?" He nodded. Calmer. Children notice what adults overlook. We spent that afternoon doing simple things. Baking cookies, talking, sitting together without needing to fill every silence. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding anything together. I was just there, present. That was enough. Michael tried to reach out, not immediately, not right away, but eventually. The first message was brief. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. The second came a few days later. "Mom, please." Still, I didn't answer. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but because I wasn't ready. And for once, I allowed myself that. Weeks passed. Then one evening, another message appeared. "I've started seeing someone, a therapist." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I did. Change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't come from confrontation alone. It comes from reflection, from discomfort, from facing things you've spent years avoiding, and maybe, just maybe, he was beginning that process. But understanding that didn't mean I owed him immediate access, or forgiveness, or anything at all, because healing isn't something you rush, it's something you allow, on your own terms. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And that made all the difference. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for explanations, not for things to go back to how they were, because how they were was never as balanced as I believed, and moving forward didn't require me to return to that. It required something else: clarity, boundaries, peace. And for the first time in a long time, I had all three. The knock came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. I was in the kitchen rinsing a cup when I heard it. For a moment I stood still, my hands resting in the sink, listening. There was something about the rhythm of it. Measured, deliberate. Not the impatient tapping of someone expecting immediate attention. Not the casual knock of a neighbor dropping by. This was intentional. I dried my hands slowly, my heart calm in a way it hadn't been months ago. Then I walked to the door and opened it. Michael stood there, alone. For a second, neither of us spoke. The space between us felt different now. Not heavy, not tense. Just real. He looked thinner. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. His shoulders weren't as rigid as before. His posture less controlled. Less certain. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was quiet, careful. I studied his face. There were lines there I hadn't seen before. Not from age, from something else. "I didn't come to argue," he added quickly, "or ask for anything." I nodded once. "Okay," I said. "That was all." I stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated for just a second, like he wasn't sure he still had the right to. Then he stepped inside. The house was quiet, the same as it had been, but now with him in it again. It felt like two timelines crossing, the past, and whatever this was. He didn't sit right away. He stood near the edge of the living room, his hands loosely at his sides, looking around like he was seeing it differently. Or maybe seeing it clearly for the first time. "I've been going to therapy," he said. Straight to it. No small talk, no pretense. I appreciated that. "I know," I said. He nodded. I didn't understand a lot of things before he continued. Or maybe I didn't want to. I didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't about me speaking. This was about him finally doing it. I kept thinking, everything I built had to be mine, he said. Completely mine. No help. No ties. He paused, searching for the right words. And every time I thought about how much you helped me, it didn't feel like support. I met his eyes. What did it feel like, I asked. He hesitated. Then said it. Like I wasn't enough on my own. There it was. The truth. Not clean, not easy, but real. I nodded slowly. And instead of dealing with that, he continued. I turned it into something else. Yes, I said, you did. He swallowed slightly. I made it about control, he admitted, about needing to take something back. I didn't respond right away, because I wanted him to hear the silence, to feel it, to understand what it carried. And what you did, I said finally, was hurt someone who never took anything from you. His eyes dropped. I know. The words were quiet, but this time, they weren't defensive. They weren't rushed. They were accepted. I didn't come here expecting you to forgive me, he said. Good, because that wasn't something he could expect. I came because I needed to say it out loud, he added. To you. I nodded. That matters, I said. And it did. Because truth once spoken honestly changes something. Not everything, but something. He looked at me again. And I'm sorry, he said. This time, he didn't rush it. Didn't attach anything to it. Didn't try to soften it or move past it. He just said it and let it stay there. I took a breath. Slow, steady. There are moments in life when people expect something specific, a reaction, a resolution, a closure that fits neatly into a story. But real life doesn't work that way. Some wounds don't close the moment an apology is offered. Some things take time. And some things change you permanently. I hear you, I said. That was the truth. I believe that you're trying to understand, I continued. Also true. But that doesn't undo what happened. His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. I know, he said. I'm not asking it to. Good, because asking would have changed everything. I don't hate you, I said. His eyes lifted slightly. But I don't trust you, I added. That part mattered more. Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Trust doesn't come back because you want it to, I said. It comes back, if it does, because it's rebuilt. He nodded again, slowly. I understand, he said, and for the first time, I believed him. Not completely, not without caution, but enough. What about us, he asked. The question lingered, not simple, not something that could be answered in a sentence. There is no us the way there used to be, I said. That part was final. But there can be something new, I added. Carefully, slowly. Something honest. Something with boundaries. Something that doesn't depend on me giving more than I should. He listened. Really listened. And that was different. I want that, he said. We'll see. Time would decide that. Not words, not promises. Time. We stood there for a moment longer. Then he let out a small breath. Ethan misses you, he said. I smiled softly. I miss him too. He talks about you all the time, Michael added. Says you're the only one who doesn't make things confusing. That sounded like him. He's a good boy, I said. Yes, Michael agreed quietly. We moved into the kitchen, not as mother and son returning to what we had been, but as two people, standing in something new. I made tea. Simple. Familiar. We sat at the table. The same table, but a different space. We talked. Not about everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to begin. That evening after he left, I stood by the window again, watching the quiet street, the same as always, and yet not the same. Because this time, I wasn't looking for something to return. I wasn't hoping for things to go back. I was simply present, at peace with what was, open to what might come, but no longer dependent on it. A few days later, Ethan came over again. He handed me a card he had made himself. Bright colors, uneven lines, carefully written words. Happy birthday, Grandma. I love you forever. I held it for a long time, longer than I needed to, because this was what mattered. Not the dinner, not the humiliation, not even the conflict. This, connection, honest, uncomplicated, real. And as I sat there with him beside me, I realized something. That night, the one they thought would break me didn't. It revealed me. It showed me exactly where I stood, what I had given, what I deserved, and what I would no longer accept. And in that clarity, I didn't lose anything. I found myself again. Sometimes the most painful moments in life are not the ones that come from strangers, but the ones that come from people we love. Because we expect more from them. We believe in them. We build parts of our identity around them. And when they hurt us, it doesn't just wound the heart. It challenges everything we thought was true. But here's what I've learned. Love does not mean tolerance without limits. Sacrifice does not mean surrendering your dignity. And forgiveness does not mean access. You can love someone and still set boundaries. You can understand someone and still walk away from what they've done. You can forgive and still choose distance. Because self-respect is not something you earn after being broken. It's something you protect, especially when others forget its value. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what I did that night. Not argue, not fight, not beg to be treated better, but simply walk away. And in doing so, take your power back. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in that moment? Have you ever had to choose between love and self-respect? Leave a comment, share your experience, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this. You're not alone, and your voice matters.